Is it a matter of faith or is it a matter of sight? That's a good question. Malcolm Gladwell tells the story about in the mid-1800s. He tells about the need of a railway line going from Boston down to the Hudson River. There was just one small problem, and that was there was a mountain, the Hoosac Mountain, that was standing in the way. This is Master Ministry, tips, tools, and truths to advance eternal effectiveness in ministry. I'm your host, Douglas Hammett. Let's move into the broadcast now. Is it a matter of faith or is it a matter of sight? That's a good question. Malcolm Gladwell tells the story about in the mid-1800s. He tells about the need of a railway line going from Boston down to the Hudson River. There was just one small problem, and that was there was a mountain, the Hoosac Mountain, that was standing in the way. Now, those of you that have been in that part of the country know that right now there's a railway, a tunnel, that goes right through there. But it wasn't always there, of course. It began in the early 1800s with a man by the name of Laomi Baldwin. And he proposed the idea of building a tunnel and putting the railway through there, but it was shot down. People decided it was too impractical, way too costly. By the middle of the 1800s, a fella came along by the name of Crocker, and he suggested that they do the job, and he began to try to amass men who would stand with him to say this was a good thing to do. They got the president of a college who was a geologist to stand with them, and he said that this particular thing was easy to do, that the outside crust was hard, but once they got on the inside, it would be easy going. Laomi Baldwin stood on the outside of that mountain and at the base of it with Crocker, and as they stood there, he said this. He said, "Why, sir, it seems as if the finger of Providence had marked out this route from the east to the west." Perhaps so is what Crocker said, but it's a pity that the finger of Providence hadn't been thrust through the Hoosac Mountain. So they had a small problem, okay? They had to get through this mountain. And so with the added weight of this president of the college saying, indeed, this is something simple to do, they had another man who came along by the name of James Hayward, who was a leading railway engineer, who said that it was very easy to do, and at the most, it would cost $2 million. So they went to Massachusetts and they asked for the money, and finally they were approved. And so they began their job, cutting through that mountain. However, as it turned out, it wasn't quite as easy as it appeared at first sight. As they started to go through the mountain, they realized that it was going to take more, and it was more difficult than what they thought, and the job ended up costing them over 10 times the $2 million that they had projected. But persevere they did, and they finished the job, despite, as you can imagine, many people objecting to all of this. So the question comes down, was their ignorance something that hindered progress, or was their ignorance something that was a condition to success? Well, let me just discuss with you for a minute something that's often caught my attention in ministry. All of us have different personality traits, if you will. Some are more cautious and very careful before they move forward, looking for evidence, wanting to see everything before they ever move forward. Others jump quickly and sometimes drowned in the process, okay? The question becomes, should we live by sight or should we live by faith? And of course, the final answer to that is we need faith, all right? We don't want to be so foolish as to jump forward in any endeavor that we might take that would cause us to not count the cost before we go to build the tower or begin to make war. Now, I'm not talking about physical war, but the parable that Jesus told. Should we count the cost? Absolutely we should. But there is also the flip side, and that's the side of faith, which often eludes many who sit back wanting to have all of the answers before they ever get started. Had these men not determined to move forward because of the cost of the $2 million, it would have never been done. Had they gotten started and come partway through the mountain, realized it's going to cost so much more that they stopped going through the mountain, what would have happened? Well, Massachusetts would have been disconnected from the Hudson River there and unable to ship their goods, the western part of Massachusetts, unable to ship their goods to be able to get them then eventually not only to market but even to the western part of the United States, which was being developed. This became critical to Massachusetts' success and their growth and kept them out of poverty. It became a necessary thing. But I suggest to you that had they known everything before they started, they would have never started, not at any $20 million. They were arguing at $2 million. Could I suggest to you that often it happens in our ministries that we don't have all the answers? All we can do is due diligence. We can inspect, we can calculate, we can try to understand the best we possibly can. But when everything gets done, we need to be willing to step forward and say, I'm going to trust God. We need to get alone with God and have some direction from Him and recognize, no, I don't know it all, and there are probably going to be setbacks that I've never even calculated for, but I'm going to trust that this is indeed the way that God is led. Now, I've found in my own ministry and in my own life time and again that the best place for me is in the deep water. No, I don't like deep water when I'm swimming. I'm not a swimmer. I probably would drown if I got in too deep a water where I couldn't grab a side or get my feet on the ground pretty quickly. But the fact is that in life itself, I found myself on ministry trips. When I go to a foreign field, I would find myself on that foreign field unable to navigate. I didn't know where things were. I didn't have any idea of the language. I didn't know what to do. And those were the times when God best blessed my efforts. The simple reason I've always deduced is this: it made me trust in Him. When I got my feet back on United States soil and back home again, well, I knew the culture. I knew where to go. I knew what to do. And it was too easy to lean on the arm of the flesh. Now, I'm not saying that it had to be that way. I'm just saying it was much easier to do. And so I'm suggesting to you, as I often counsel myself, as I counseled some men out in the bush just yesterday, that we need to put ourselves in places where we must trust God. We have to be in places to where when we face the situation, we say, I don't know what to do. That's okay. It's time for faith and not for sight. It's the best place for you and I to be, in a place of dependence upon Almighty God. Don't be afraid to launch out into the deep when you don't know what's there, as long as you're following the directions of the Lord Himself. The folks that built that tunnel and ultimately laid the track for the railroad did incalculable good, and had they not gone through with the project, much would have been lost. I suggest to you that in the work of God, much will be lost if you don't step out by faith and trust God. No, I am not arguing for foolishness, but please, please, if you have to err on one side or the other, err on the side of faith, not on the side of sight. Think about it. God bless you. Thanks for listening. You know your ministry does not have to stagnate or die. If you want to get out of the box and into the book, get some help right now. Give me a shout at pdhammett@gmail.com. We'll discuss what you need and recommend a course of action. Get in touch with me. You can also find tips, tools, and truths to advance eternal effectiveness in ministry and make an eternal impact at masterministry.com. Thanks for listening. Now let's go make a difference.